The topic I'm going to speak about in a nutshell, in a few minutes, is EU enlargement. I have established at Central European University several years ago, by 2005, a research center on EU enlargement studies. As far as I know, this is a unique institution in the whole world. Nobody took the courage to put that title on a research institution, having in mind that enlargement fatigue in the EU and some nebulous perspectives. So this is the topic I would like to speak about in three short points. One is conditionality of enlargement. The second one are the perspectives for next future enlargement. And the third one is an emerging new topic, post-enlargement or post-accession conditionality. The EU strongly believes in what they call the transformative power and stabilizing effect of the enlargement process and the EU's soft power. I quoted this short sentence from the most recent enlargement strategy of the European Union, which came out a few days ago. There are regular reports drafted by the European Commission in the form of a report to the Council and to the Parliament. And the most recent paper starts with that idea, this very courageous statement that there is a strong transformative power of the EU, at least in its direct neighborhood. Of course, conditionality, because the EU is considering itself as a normative power, setting norms and proposing something in exchange if countries are following those norms. Mainly, the biggest weapon of the EU is money, of course, granting aid, support, and the biggest reward of complying with EU norms is EU accession, EU membership. Now, as EU membership perspectives are not quite sure and certain, we can put various questions about the efficiency of such conditionality. Which are the main conditions? I could speak hours and hours about the EU conditions, but we have to locate those conditions in at least three different phases. One is the overall normative behavior of the EU in the UN, in talks with China, or in any relationship representing the famous values which are precised in the basic treaty, today in the Lisbon Treaty. There's a second phase, what we call the pre-accession conditionality, with the perspective of being one day an EU member. This is a dynamic phase. The first one is a general, we could even call it a static phase, but this second one is a dynamic phase telling to Bosnia that if such and such conditions are being accepted and implemented in that country, then it would bring Bosnia closer to the perspective of EU membership. This is a very dynamic issue, and if membership perspective is credible and real, then it really works. And lately, the EU has acquired some new evidence, new experience about what is happening after the wedding. This was not a problem before, but with the so-called new member states, which are not so new after almost 10 years of membership, this is a new question: what about post-accession conditionality? Whether countries are really keeping, observing, implementing those norms they have accepted voluntarily in the pre-accession phase. There is a large set of enlargement conditions. We all know that in the basic treaty there is always one article dealing with accession. Today it is Article 49, which is at the same time about conditions and procedures of accession. The strongest and the most known condition is the geographical one that all European states can apply. But it needs an interpretation. Where are the borders of Europe? What is Europe in that context of the basic treaty? And we may forget about the importance of the second part, states. They should be consolidated, finished states with no territorial disputes, with no border demarcation problems, and so on. The EU has learned a lot, and one unfinished state is still among the members. This is Cyprus, which is not detaining sovereign rights on all the territory and on all the inhabitants. So this is a very bad example, a bad precedent for other countries, that the EU was not strong enough to resist to Greek pressure and to take one unfinished state. But our neighborhood is full with half-finished states with various problems. On the Balkans, it's still a procedure, and in the eastern neighborhood, there are the famous frozen conflicts, which means territorially unfinished states. As far as the procedures are concerned, unanimity is the most important precondition. Any state demanding accession needs a unanimous acceptance on behalf of the EU members. So they have to gain the support of each and every member state. Any press report about the warm support of a candidate on behalf of one or two or three EU member states has a rather little value, because the real support should be perfectly unanimous on behalf of all the countries. If there is one single country, let it be Malta, opposing the accession, then it's a very weak political position. We can follow it in the very long accession process of Turkey, that if Germany and France and Austria are not very enthusiastic on the Turkish accession as a full member, unanimity is still not achieved. And there are some other aspects which we cannot deepen in such a short presentation. For instance, the size of states. We have got 4 mini-states that are de facto members of the EU, like San Marino, the Vatican, Monaco, and Andorra. They find themselves on the territory of the EU. They are applying automatically EU rules. They are using euro, but they are not represented by their politicians in EU institutions, whereas they are full members of the OSCE, UN, and others. On the waiting list, or not directly on the waiting list, but as a potential candidate, there is Liechtenstein. One day Liechtenstein could apply, and then it would be a difficult challenge for the EU how to respond to Liechtenstein, because we have got from the very beginnings one strong precedent. This is Luxembourg. But there is only one Luxembourg, speaking English, French, German. Any educated person is speaking the 3 languages, and being in the heart of Western Europe, it is much more difficult with other smaller states. Burden sharing, versus political representation. Because when prime ministers are sitting around, which is just the case now, they've started yesterday night in Brussels on the new summit, then one country is one seat. And one seat is one speaking person. So the German Chancellor and the Prime Minister of Cyprus have the very same rights to speak, to ask the floor and to deliver the speech. Then we have some other, we have a few what we call unwritten conditions. The EU is usually taking direct neighbors, hardly ever jumping over the head of a direct neighbor, just taking, it's a very medieval, feudal expansion techniques, taking always the next territory. The EU prefers group enlargements, does not like to waste time with single candidates, but is embracing several countries and putting them together in one basket. And we can observe a rhythm of decades in enlargement. So usually one enlargement wave, sometimes divided into two parts in one decade. And on that basis we can make some forecasts. There are some missing conditions, for instance, membership in other international organizations. It would be very useful to stipulate as a formal precondition Council of Europe, WTO, OECD, as a pre-test for the countries, not wasting time with testing whether the country is a market economy. And one big discussion topic, the economic development level. Because we are extending the EU towards the periphery. Poor countries are queuing up in a large number, and the net contributors to the EU budget are the same. There are only two potential candidates who would bring more money, but they are not crazy enough to bring their money to the EU, Switzerland and Norway. All the others are poor beggars coming for money. I'm sorry for that expression, but this is the vision of the Swedish, German, Dutch, and many others, that we have to pay and pay and pay the money of our taxpayers, and they are only asking, not contributing a penny. The result is the very sharp discussions within the EU multi-annual financial framework, the budget, when the donors have limited the overall size of the EU budget to one single person of the GNI, the gross national income of all the countries. So these are the main problems and conditions. Now, what about the perspectives? A few words in accordance with the recent enlargement strategy. Focus on the Western Balkans. The Western Balkan countries have real chances to be a member in the EU in the foreseeable future. The report starts with small Montenegro. That country has begun negotiations last year. There is a long list of requirements concerning the judiciary, fundamental rights, justice, public administration, and so on. Serbia is a candidate full with hopes. Last June, the European Council has decided to open negotiations. September this year, the Stabilization and Association Agreement with Serbia entered into force. And maybe the most important, I should have mentioned it even before, in April, Serbia and Kosovo concluded an agreement, a kind of an understanding, which we usually call, with the first words of the title, First Agreement of Principles Governing the Normalization of Relations between Serbia and Kosovo. And we call it the first agreement. So the first agreement is there. with an implementation plan that was added 1 month later. And with all that in the background, Serbia has a good chance to start accession negotiations by January next year. It has been confirmed by the re-elected German Chancellor, Mrs. Merkel. Macedonia is an open issue, internal political crisis, problems with the freedom of expression, inter-ethnic problems. There is a roughly 40% strong Albanian minority in the country, and the name issue. The name of the state, which is contested by one single country, Greece, and even the UN mediation could not succeed to solve this problem. Albania, deep political crisis dividing the country, corruption, organized crime, and many others. In spite of all that, the European Commission has proposed to attribute the candidate status to Albania to encourage its internal normalization. Bosnia and Herzegovina is at a standstill. This is the frozen picture of the 1995 Dayton Peace Agreement, dividing the country into three ethnic units and making a fundament for the peace, but not building a new state. They are there separated from each other, and they have adapted their everyday life to that divided situation. There are some problems because Bosnia has refused to adapt its trade regime with the EU to the Croatian accession. There should be a protocol which is adapting trade rules to the new situation of EU 28. And finally, Kosovo has joined this team, and in June they could open the Stabilization and Association Agreement talks with the EU, in spite of the fact that 5 out of the EU member states have not officially recognized Kosovo. This is a very special case. They will teach it in the future, most probably, that selecting the wrong way of expression, because the position of those countries like Spain or Greece or Romania or Slovakia is not about Kosovo at all. They like Kosovo, they can accept Kosovo. They have problems with their own internal fears of separatism, and they just use the case of Kosovo in order to demonstrate that we are not in favor of secession of a state, just like Kosovo divided itself, separated itself from the body of Serbia, and gained the recognition, first of all, of the United States to be a new state on the map. Turkey is a very long story. This is the hopeless fiancé of the EU, applied in 1987, had to wait 12 years to get the candidate status by 99, another 6 years to start the negotiations, and has been negotiated since 8 years now. Altogether, these are 26 years, more than a generation time, and no wonder that the support for prospective EU membership has declined in Turkey in the meantime. And Turkey is looking for alternative ways. There's a long list of requirements: judicial reform, treatment of the Kurds, other minorities. Recently, the reactions of the government to the demonstrations in Istanbul, and many others. In spite of all that, new chapter has been opened about the regional policy. Turkey is just moving. And surprisingly enough, in the enlargement strategy, there is a sub-chapter about Cyprus. Cyprus is not a candidate country, but this is reflecting the unfinished nature of the problem, that there is a call for one of the member states that Greek and Turkish parts of Cyprus should find an understanding and should somehow finish that unfinished status. And we have Iceland that suspended negotiations, started, but as the strategy formulates, put on hold the negotiations. Probably a referendum should decide upon the future. If we open another chapter of that enlargement strategy, we can find a detailed list of what the EU calls key challenges. Key challenges are conditions. This is the conditionality part, the pre-accession conditionality, in rather deep details under 5 headlines, which are reflecting the requirements of the EU. In the heart of all the conditions, as the paper formulates, there is the rule of law. The rule of law is the most important precondition. The judicial system, the appointment of judges, whether law is dominating the functioning of the country. Economic governance is another field, and competitiveness. Only Turkey and of course Iceland have been recognized as full market economies. The Western Balkan countries have to prove their abilities that they will be market economies in the near future. The third chapter of conditionality is institutions and democracy. The transparency of institutions, the accountability, consensus building techniques and culture within those countries, like Albania or Macedonia, whether the two sides of the parliament can communicate with each other, can find consensus, can find agreements with each other. Reconciliation in divided societies. The societies should be one community and not divided by internal division lines. Then comes another very rich chapter, fundamental rights. Hate speech, condemning violence, condemning intimidation of minorities, the freedom of expression, abuse of state power, treatment of Roma and other minorities. And finally, bilateral issues which cover mainly neighborly relations of the countries, treating the legacy of the past. There is a so-called Truth and Reconciliation Initiative, but there are technical questions like border demarcations between two countries. You may remember the sea border dispute between Slovenia and Croatia back in time, and promoting regional cooperation. And this brings us to the last point, which is post-accession conditionality. There are 3 categories under this headline, because initially the EU had a very simple technical procedure dealing with cases when a member state is not complying with the legal obligations. These are the infringement procedures. Infringement procedure is basically a technical question. If the Commission is stating that a member state is not in line with any legal device of the community of the Union, first they are sending questions and they get some explanation. Second, if that answer is not satisfactory, they are making an investigation of the case, asking kindly the member state to comply with its obligations, and if it is not working, then they send the whole dossier to European Court in Luxembourg. to take a judgment and to oblige that country. It's as simple as that. Okay, in the meantime, with some new member states, infringement procedures took a political dimension. The champion is unfortunately my own country, Hungary, which has not the highest number, because Greece and Italy are the champions in breaching EU norms as far as the numbers are concerned. But as far as the political weight of the issues, is Hungary by far the number one. Usually, I have advised some Hungarian companies on infringement procedures in the past, and my usual activity was to find the director in the EU Commission who was dealing with the dossier. And sometimes, in a very difficult situation, I tried to approach the general director. But the general director didn't like it. He said it's a technical issue, so it's not my job. It's the director who can arrange it. He is competent, he knows the dossier. Now the problem with those Hungarian issues is that commissioners are speaking about. Commissioners feel the necessity to express themselves on such issues, not the director, not even the general director. And there was a moment when Barroso took all the Hungarian dossiers under his surveillance. So this is the political weight of it. The second issue emerged together with the Eurozone. This is the excessive deficit procedure. The Eurozone, with the famous Maastricht criteria, is stipulating that the deficit of the budget cannot be more than 3% of the GDP. And there are procedures if it is going beyond that figure. This is the excessive deficit procedure, very similar that the EU is a very polite organization. So asking kindly the member state, put on the table a plan, a convergence plan, that how would you comply and when with that requirement. And they like if the member state is shaping its own program. If there is a longer time demonstrating that the member state is not able to keep that level, then they say sorry, but we are not pouring more wine in that barrel with a big hole, which is your budget, because if you are wasting money from the budget, then there is no use to add more EU money to finance your deficitary budget. So this is suspending EU funds for that time when, as long as the hole is not being treated. The third issue is the Article 7 procedure, which has emerged the necessity when a radical right party was taken in the government coalition in Austria by the year 2000. Jörg Haider and his party. Then first member states tried to isolate this country, and later on they added new articles to the basic treaty, telling more about the values and introducing a procedure of suspending the voting rights of a member state if that member state is not complying with the values. This article has never been applied so far, but it's there. Now the problem is that these are the three kinds of procedures, but there are two phenomena which emerge with some new countries. One is that some leaders of some new member states are openly questioning the fundamental obligations and the fundamental values, the quality of the EU, and the usefulness of being an EU member. The first big personality doing so has been Václav Klaus from the Czech Republic. but his best pupil is Viktor Orbán, the actual Prime Minister of Hungary, sending almost every week some very bad message to the address of the EU, which is not useful for the country, and there are some reverse effects of such speaking. So this is questioning the EU, and the next step is stepping out from the EU, which is, of course, possible. A huge change in the Lisbon Treaty has been adding Article 50. It's right after the accession article that divorce has been allowed. It's such a big change as in the Catholic Church, which is not recognizing divorce in that form. So now the EU is open for divorce. You can do it, if you like. The procedure is rather lengthy and complicated, but the British Prime Minister has promised to put this question at a referendum if he is being re-elected by 2017. And some other political leaders are just gambling with that idea, floating it, speaking about it. Well, it's possible, but there should be a very firm engagement to demonstrate whether we like to be in or we like to be out. We can see one thing, that from the outside the EU is still very attractive, and all states in the neighborhood strive to be members. I thank you for your attention, and I am here for a few more minutes for taking your questions if you have any. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question about enlargement. About enlargement.
Yes.
Is there any limit of the enlargement for the EU? And if it is, like, where you will stop?
I will give you a very quick answer. We are 28 today, 28 states. If you read the enlargement report and you add the names I have just mentioned, you come to the contours of an EU of 36 members. If all those countries, if Iceland is going on, Turkey is being taken, and all the Western Balkans. And then comes the next question, where are the ends of Europe? How many more states? There are two I have mentioned, Switzerland and Norway. Anytime, if they decide, they would be most welcome in the EU. And there is the Eastern Partnership Program, embracing the rest of countries, so Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia. An EU of 44 members, not counting the mini-states I have also mentioned. So this would be the end, the maximum. These are the ends of Europe, 44. Yeah.
I would like to ask you about your personal opinion about Turkey's issue. How realistic do you think it is that Turkey would join the EU in the near future, in the distant future, or anytime in the future?
It depends on the two sides. For me, one question is whether Turkey is still maintaining its willingness. For the time being, Turkey is doing its job, but Prime Minister Erdogan said in a speech that the final date of our patience would be the 100-year anniversary of the modern Turkish state, which is 2023, which was a warning to the not later. This is the question. I'm afraid that Turkey may change its mind even before, depending on world politics, the Middle East crisis, and many other issues. Turkey is very near to some alternatives. The other side is, of course, the EU. Unanimity is the key word. But, of course, unanimity is usually starting with a critical mass of influential countries. This is the start, this is the snowball effect. And of course, any critical mass should include Germany and France. There is no start without that. We were waiting for some time the new president of France. Now we have François Hollande. He is seemingly not against. He has a milder position than his predecessor, Nicolas Sarkozy. Then we were waiting for the German parliamentary elections. Now we have a reconfirmation for Angela Merkel. We don't know yet what would be the German position, because this is the marriage of water and fire. CDU, CSU have been traditionally against the full membership of Turkey. SPD, their partner in the big coalition, has always been in favor. Now I'm looking forward to see what would be the mixture and the final outcome of the big coalition. I'm not quite sure that SPD would win that game, so it's still open. Maybe one more question. Yes?
You have talked about the growing experience of post-concession. Is that anyhow influencing the current dynamics of conditionality with the new candidate members?
Of course it does. EU conditionality, pre-accession conditionality has been enriched by the experience of the new member states. Romania and Bulgaria, that started on the same day as Poland or Hungary or the other countries, have got some more homework during that time after our accession, and they were still negotiating. They got some new chapters on minority rights protection, because the EU has already learned something. And the EU is still learning from the experience of the new member states. That rather lengthy list of conditions for the Western Balkan countries is based on the experience with the new member states. So the EU tries to transfer. The problem is that it is so easy to be a schoolmaster towards the candidates, because the candidates are kept by that situation that they would like to be members and they comply. The problem is how to implement the rules within the EU with members. That's what we call the after the wedding phenomenon, that the fiancé is promising everything and after the wedding the behavior may change.